Have you ever wondered how a young man like Solomon could inherit the throne of the great King David? It's a story filled with struggle, choices, and faith. In this episode, we dive into Solomon's first journey, from doubt to a humble prayer that forever changed his destiny. Let's begin this inspiring tale.
I am Solomon, son of David, a king whose shadow loomed over me even as I stood in the light. My name carried weight, not because of what I had done, but because of what was expected of me. Have you ever felt the eyes of thousands upon you, expecting strength when you could barely stand? This is how my journey began. The air was heavy that day, thick with the whispers of courtiers and the shuffle of sandals against stone floors. My father, David, lay weak upon his bed, his face etched with the lines of battles fought and burdens borne. His room smelled of frankincense and old cedar, but underneath it lingered the sharp tang of mortality. Adonijah, my half-brother, had already declared himself king. I was not there when he held his feast, his supporters cheering his name as though the throne was his birthright. Instead, I sat with my mother, Bathsheba, her hands trembling as she grasped mine. "We must act," she said, her voice a mix of fear and resolve. "Your father promised you the throne." When we entered my father's chamber, the light from the window fell in thin golden beams, dust motes dancing in the silence. Nathan, the prophet, stood beside us, his presence like a pillar of iron. My mother's voice, though steady, betrayed the urgency in her heart. "My lord, did you not swear that Solomon would succeed you?" My father's gaze shifted to me. His eyes, though clouded with age, held a depth that pierced through my doubts. He raised a hand, his voice frail but unwavering. "Solomon shall be king," he declared. "This is the will of the Lord." At that moment, I felt the weight of the words settle upon my shoulders, like a mantle too heavy for a boy to bear. Have you ever been given something you did not ask for, yet knew you could not refuse? The room seemed to hold its breath as I knelt before my father, the stone floor cold against my knees. The warmth of his hand on my head was both a blessing and a burden. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sound of trumpets echoed through Jerusalem. The city stirred with the news of my anointing, but within me there was no triumph, only the quiet tremor of a boy who had just been given the world and wondered if he could carry it. The air in the palace was different that day, alive with an uneasy tension that prickled the skin. Whispers coiled through the stone corridors like serpents, low and venomous, weaving tales of ambition and betrayal. Adonijah, my half-brother, had crowned himself king. He feasted with his allies, the clatter of goblets and the roar of laughter rising like a tide of defiance. From where I sat, the sound was a distant echo, carried on the currents of rumor that swept through Jerusalem. My mother, Bathsheba, sat across from me, her face pale but determined. The glow of an oil lamp cast flickering shadows on the walls, the faint scent of burning olive oil mingling with the stale air. "Solomon," she began, her voice barely above a whisper but heavy with resolve. "Your father swore that you would be king, yet now Adonijah seeks to steal what is yours." Her words were a stone dropped into a still pool, sending ripples of fear and doubt through my heart. I was young and untested, and the weight of kingship felt like a mantle I could not yet carry. Have you ever felt as though the world expected something of you that you were not ready to give? Nathan, the prophet, arrived shortly after, his presence filling the room with a quiet gravity. His robes rustled faintly as he moved, his voice steady as stone. "We must act quickly," he said, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "The Lord has chosen Solomon, and his will must be done." We entered my father's chamber together, the air thick with the smell of aged cedar and the faint, bitter undertone of illness. David lay upon his bed, his frame diminished, but his spirit unbroken. The light from a high window fell in narrow beams, cutting through the dimness to rest upon his face, lined with years of triumph and struggle. Bathsheba stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My lord," she began, her words carefully measured, Did you not swear to me that Solomon, your son, would inherit the throne? Yet now Adonijah has declared himself king." David's eyes, clouded with age, turned toward me. At that moment I felt as though his gaze pierced through the veil of doubt that surrounded me, laying bare my fear and my uncertainty. "Solomon," he said, his voice a rasp that carried the weight of command, "you shall be king." The words fell like a hammer upon an anvil, forging a path I could not refuse. My knees hit the cold stone floor as I knelt before him, the chills seeping through the thin fabric of my robes. His hand, frail but steady, rested upon my head. The warmth of his touch was a blessing, but it also carried the weight of expectation, a burden as heavy as the crown I would one day wear. The trumpets sounded as the sun began its descent, their sharp, clear notes slicing through the air. The city stirred with the news of my anointing, the streets alive with the shuffle of feet and the murmur of voices. Yet within me there was no triumph, no joy, only the steady drumbeat of responsibility pounding in my chest. Have you ever been thrust into a role you did not choose, yet knew you must fulfill? As the cries of the people rose to meet the evening sky, I stood at the threshold of a journey that would demand more of me than I could yet comprehend. The crown awaited, but so did the trials, the sacrifices, and the endless questions that would define my reign. And so, I stood, a boy on the brink of kingship, wondering if I would ever be enough. The hall was a cacophony, the murmur of voices blending with the shuffle of hurried feet as preparations for my anointing began. Outside, the city stirred like a waking beast, its people spilling into the streets to glimpse the boy who would become their king. The scent of burning incense lingered in the air, thick and heavy, mingling with the faint tang of sweat from the servants who scurried to and fro. I stood at the center of the chamber, the weight of expectation pressing down on me. The walls, adorned with tapestries of battles fought and won, seemed to close in, their silent witnesses to the enormity of what was about to unfold. Have you ever felt the world was watching, holding its breath, waiting for you to step into a role you were not certain you could fill? Nathan, the prophet, approached his presence as a steady anchor in the storm of my thoughts. His robes brushed the stone floor with a whisper, his eyes fixed on mine with calm resolve. "The Lord has chosen you," he said, his voice low but firm. "This is his will, and it will be done." The oil was brought forth in a vessel of gold, its surface catching the light and casting a warm glow across the room. As Nathan dipped his fingers into the sacred liquid, the room fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over us like a tangible force. When his hand touched my head, the oil was cool against my skin, its scent rich and earthy, grounding me in a reality I could not escape. "Solomon, son of David," Nathan intoned, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You are anointed as king over Israel, chosen by God to lead his people." The words fell like stones into a still pond, their ripples spreading outward, unseen but deeply felt. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of the life I had been called to live and the responsibilities I had been asked to bear. Outside, the sound of trumpets pierced the air, sharp and clear, their notes carrying the news of my anointing to the waiting city. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices rising in a crescendo of joy and hope. But within me, there was no jubilation, only the quiet tremor of uncertainty. Could I leave these people, protect them, guide them as he had done? The doors to the chamber were thrown open, and I stepped out into the blinding light of the afternoon sun. The heat was oppressive, the air shimmering with its intensity, but the sight of the people gathered before me held my attention. Their faces were a sea of emotions, hope, curiosity, reverence, and all of it directed at me. As I stood there, the crown heavy in my hands, I felt its weight not in gold, but in the responsibility it represented. Have you ever held something so precious, so significant, that you feared you might drop it? My hands trembled as I lifted it to my head, the cool metal settling against my brow like a silent promise. On the way down to the 5th row, The crowd roared as the crown was placed, their cheers washing over me like a wave. Yet amidst the noise, I heard the steady voice of Nathan in my mind. The Lord has chosen you. It was a reminder, a reassurance, but also a challenge. This was not a position I had sought, but one I had been given, and with it came a purpose greater than myself. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the city, I retreated to the quiet of the palace. The noise of the celebration faded behind me, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze and the distant hum of voices. Alone in my chamber, I knelt on the cool stone floor, my head bowed in prayer. "Lord," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the stillness, "grant me the wisdom to lead your people, the strength to carry this burden, and the humility to remember that it is not my will but yours that must be done." And so my journey as king began, not with triumph, but with a quiet plea for guidance, a silent acknowledgement of the road ahead and the weight of what it meant to walk it. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your ears until you hear the rhythm of your own breathing. Jerusalem slept, its streets empty save for the occasional murmur of the wind that whispered through the narrow alleys. But within the palace walls, I was awake, my mind restless and tangled with questions. Have you ever found yourself alone with your thoughts, the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears bearing down on you? I sat by the window of my chamber, the cool stone sill beneath my palms grounding me in the reality I could not escape. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light spilling across the city like a silver veil. From this height, the world seemed vast and quiet, and yet I felt the burden of every soul who looked to me for guidance. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the stone. The air was thick with the scent of cedar, and the faint tang of oil from the lamps that flickered in the hallways. Each flame danced with a life of its own, casting shadows that shifted and stretched across the walls, mirroring the unease that churned within me. And then, as sleep began to tug at the edges of my awareness, I felt a presence, a stillness so profound it seemed to silence even my thoughts. I was no longer in my chamber, but standing in a vast expanse of light, pure and all-encompassing. Before me was a voice, neither loud nor soft, but steady, like the hum of the earth itself. "Ivonnetab parmi exist." "Solomon," the voice said, and my name carried a weight I had never known before. "Ask for whatever you want me to give you," Solomon said. The question hung in the air, and I felt its enormity wrap around me like a cloak. Wealth, power, victory over my enemies. These were the things a king might ask for. These were the things expected of someone in my position. But standing there, bathed in that light, I thought not of myself, but of the people who would wake tomorrow and look to me for answers. "Lord," I began, my voice trembling with the weight of my plea, "you have shown great kindness to my father David, and now you have made me king in his place. But I am only a child, inexperienced and unsure, and I must lead a great people, too numerous to count. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people, and to distinguish between right and wrong." The words left my lips, and in the silence that followed, I felt the depth of what I had asked for. Have you ever made a choice so profound that you knew it would shape the rest of your life? That was this moment for me, a moment where I stood not as a king, but as a servant, seeking wisdom not for myself, but for those I had been called to lead. The voice returned, warm and filled with a grace I could scarcely comprehend. "Because you have asked for this, not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor the death of your enemies, I will give you what you have asked for. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings." As the light began to fade, I awoke with a start, the first rays of dawn spilling into my chamber. The city stirred below, unaware of the covenant that had been forged in the quiet of the night. I touched my chest, where the weight of the promise still lingered, and I knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The morning air was crisp as I stepped onto the balcony, the sound of birdsong mingling with the distant hum of life beginning anew in the city. My heart was steady now, filled not with doubt, but with a quiet determination. The wisdom I had asked for was not a gift to be held, but a responsibility to be lived. And so I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have sought glory, riches, power? Or would you too have asked for the strength to serve, to lead with humility and grace? These questions remain with me, as I imagine they will remain with you. The night after my prayer felt unlike any other. The stillness was profound, the air heavy with the weight of a promise. As I lay in my chamber, my thoughts circled like restless birds, unable to settle. The cool stone beneath me felt alive, as if it too carried the weight of the covenant forged in the quiet hours before dawn. The city outside stirred in its sleep, a faint hum of life carried on the breeze. From my window the faint glow of oil lamps flickered like distant stars, casting shadows that danced across the walls of my chamber. Have you ever felt the tension between peace and purpose, knowing that you've asked for something monumental, yet feeling unworthy of receiving it? The memory of the dream stayed with me, the light, the voice, the words that had etched themselves into the fabric of my being. Because you have asked for this, the voice had said, and even now those words reverberated within me, a constant reminder of what had been granted and what was expected in return. When I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of my people, young and old, hopeful and weary, each one a thread in the tapestry of the kingdom I had been chosen to lead. Their voices were silent now, but I could feel the weight of their prayers, their fears, their hopes, all laid at my feet like offerings at an altar. I rose from my bed and stepped onto the balcony, the chill of the night air biting at my skin. The stars above seemed impossibly vast, their cold light a stark contrast to the warmth of the promise that burned within me. "Lord," I whispered, my breath misting in the air, "guide me. Let your wisdom be my light, for I cannot do this alone." And so, as the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the city in shades of gold and rose, I stood ready to face what lay ahead. Have you ever stood at the edge of something so much greater than yourself, knowing that every step forward would demand more than you believed you could give? That was the morning I truly became a king.
And so Solomon became king. But what happens when he is given the chance to ask for anything from God? Will he choose wealth, power, or something else entirely? Don't miss the next episode as we uncover how Solomon used his priceless gift. Remember to like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to never miss an episode of The Wisdom of Solomon. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.